Welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is The Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. Happy MLK Day. This is the day where even the rabidly racist and the hateful among us pull out the random MLK quote that they don't understand and throw them around like they do understand it. As if they understand what it's like to be a minority. So happy MLK Day. It is what it is. And I saw a bunch of that on Twitter. People, throwing these quotes out, trying to make it about themselves when they are not nowhere near who Dr. King was really talking about. So I just find it very odd and ironic. And look, I'll be honest, as a kid growing up in a predominantly black neighborhood as a kid, I thought I understood. I thought I got it because, I lived around people who were struggling. I lived in a really high poverty neighborhood where you have all of it was a housing project on the west side of Cleveland. And you had all of those socioeconomic problems. You had all of the race problems. All that stuff was there. I thought I understood until 2015 when, as part of the show, we went to some of the places in the South where horrible, horrible things have happened in our past. Not things that I think we've, as a nation, atoned for. Not things that I think people have been responsible for, but we have turned it into tourism now. So every place where there was something horrible that happened, there's now a museum where somebody's trying to make a buck off of it. And look, I'll be honest, I went through a bunch of them on our tour throughout the South. And I'll tell you, each time I went to one of these museums, something else grabbed me and said, how can this be? How could people do this to each other? And I'm thinking of the one that really, there were two moments that I'll probably stick with me. Well, there are a bunch from that 2015 tour that'll stick with me. But we went to the place in Greensboro, North Carolina, where the lunch counter, where the more famous of the lunch counter, strikes happened, where the A&T 4 refused to move. And, they still have the Woolworths counter in the basement. And they still, it's beautiful. It's incredible. And as the curator was taking us on the tour and explaining, why and how and what and all this stuff, because we had our kids with us. And at the time, my kids were, 12, 13, 7 and 5, I guess. The curator's like, before we go into this next section, let me get somebody to take the kids around to the other side. And I didn't know where we were going next. I said, if you think that's best, by all means. I don't want them scarred for life. And they took us into this room where they had all these pictures on the wall of people who had been hung and burned, and their charred bodies, and just horrible stuff. And you go, we never learned about this when I was in school. We never learned this part of history. We heard about the burning crosses. We heard about what we were told was an occasional lynching, far worse than what I was ever told as a kid. And when we did this tour, because it came out of, my oldest daughter was in school at the time, and she came home, and you go through that parent thing where, what'd you do today? What'd you learn? How was it? So she came home and said, you learned about Rosa Parks. And I'm like, oh, cool. What'd you learn? She was tired. And I'm going, nothing more than that? And she didn't want to give up her seat, and it was all this stuff. And just the barest of minimum facts. So I got this bright idea that I wanted to do a kind of a labor civil rights history tour, which we spent for almost, I guess it was like 3 weeks, where we went across the South, and we hit all of these places where horrible things happened to black people, and the kids were exposed to this history. And I learned just an immense amount. And it's one of these things where this history does have to be told, because it really opened my eyes. And the other moment that I'll never forget is we were in Birmingham, Alabama. And if you're ever in Birmingham, There is the Civil Rights Museum right across from the 16th Street Baptist Church, the one that was bombed. That is just incredible, and the curator Ahmad is fantastic. But we went through the whole tour, and he showed us all these things. They had just fantastic stuff. They actually had the jail cell recreated with the actual door, the bed, and the stool, and everything that Dr. King was locked up in, where he wrote the letters from the Birmingham jail. They had all kinds of stuff, and they had Bull Connor's tank, which was. I mean, and the guy said, look, he goes, we're one of the only museums in the world where our most prized possessions you can go up to and you can actually hold. So the fact that you could actually hold the bars that Dr. King was locked behind was a pretty powerful thing. But as we got to the end of it, where Bull Connor's tank was, there was a little display case. And this is, I've cried maybe a handful of times in my life. This was almost one of those times. I mean, it was, I was choking up. It was one of those things where it hit me. There was a little case, a little display case, probably about 3 feet wide by about 2 feet deep, and in it had a little girl's purse. Kind of like any one of my daughters would have had, with little trinkets and little things in it, tissues, and just things you would expect a young girl to have in their purse. And it was one of the purses of the 4 girls who were killed in the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing. Then to connect that day we went and we did a bunch of interviews, and we had a fantastic person down there helping us arrange interviews. Terry was amazing. And we got to talk to all kinds of people who told just incredible stories, about the one woman, how they all jumped out of the window at school at a certain time to go to go get arrested without their parents knowing it. It was just these really incredible stories of defiance and of perseverance and just the courage to step forward. But there was one old guy that came in. And he waddled in really quietly and really slowly, and I have no idea who he is. I have no idea who any of the people who they are until they sit down in front of me and we start talking and we have these incredible conversations. And this guy's name was Fate Morris, and it didn't trigger in my head. But as he's telling this story, and he's explaining what happened the day of the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing, he actually found his sister's headless body underneath a door that had, and this man who's, at the time was probably 70 years old, just broke into total, breakdown. And it was one of those things where I rarely am speechless. I'm rarely, stuck for anything to say or do. And this is one of those moments where I just stopped and, I went to the guy and, tried to console him and, that and everything else was aside. And I'll tell you, having gone through that, having seen these stories and spoken with these folks, it gives you a sense of their struggle. And why, when people say that Black Lives Matter, you go, yeah, maybe we do need to put that first, because for so long in this country, it hasn't. And the sad reality is it's this that has brought so much division in our country, so much craziness. I mean, this past weekend, we were expecting, armed militias to show up at state capitals and cause all kinds of chaos. We were expecting just some of the worst, horrible stuff to come out of, today's Klan members. Fortunately, they didn't come out. Fortunately, they saw, maybe we're going to get some kind of response. It's not going to be like in the past where we've been able to run roughshod over people. So they stayed home, and good. Maybe this is one of those moments where there's some awakening for some. You're never going to get all of them. You're still going to have the crazies, but maybe for some there's going to be an awakening. Now, will tomorrow bring the 190 indictments that some of them are telling me are coming? Because I come back to this moment where you go, you have these people who have all of these conspiracy theories and believe all this craziness, and I wonder what will happen once they realize that it ain't so. There aren't 190 indictments coming down tomorrow. Joe Biden's not going to be one of them. Donald Trump's not going to be inaugurated in March. There's all this insanity, and there's part of me that goes, maybe we need to get past these milestones to go, okay, see, it didn't happen. You were wrong. Is there a way to come back to sanity? Is there a way to get off the ledge? Maybe we can talk about how we're going to make everyone's lives better. Now, again, I go, I'm looking at the inauguration this week, and I'm hoping for Biden to lay out a great plan to move the country forward. But I don't really know or care to hear any false calls or failed rhetoric around unity. Sorry, we're not. There are some we're never going to get, and we let them go. The rest of us have to figure out how to move forward. And what we need is a president who's going to say, we got work to do. We don't have time to deal with children. We got work to do fighting this pandemic, rebuilding our economy, rebuilding our infrastructure. And we're going to do this. Now, if we have all of these crazy people that we're arresting, and I tell you, I'm loving these stories of all of these people who are getting arrested all across the country for their insanity on January 6th. Honestly, one of my favorites is this lunatic in Texas, who I guess had the little GoPro on his helmet, running around taping his treason, who actually threatened his children if they turned him in, threatened to shoot and kill his children, because he told them, you know what happens to traitors. Traitors get shot, and that's a guy who should not have a gun. If you were literally threatening your own children, there's something wrong. The other guy, the Cowboys for Trump guy, who is a complete lunatic, an elected official from New Mexico, I'm glad he got arrested. We need to get these kooks out, find homes for them and the places that we have empty, because we got plenty of empty jail cells. We can put them in those. I'm all in favor of that. But what we have to do is we have to figure out how to separate the crazy from the rest of us. I mean, it's sad. I saw this story. It is sad that the FBI is screening all of the 25,000 National Guard troops who are going to be, watching the Capitol on Wednesday, because there's fear that maybe one of them is going to do something. Now, there are no credible threats, according to the acting defense secretary, which I got to be honest with you, have no faith in Christopher Miller, the acting secretary of defense. The guy who said Russia's playing a good hand. They got a bad hand, but they're playing it really well, which means they're literally kicking our behind. And he's okay with it because they're doing it. They're playing a bad hand really well. For me on Wednesday, what I want to see, what I want to hear from Joe Biden is how we're moving forward, how we're going to stop the pandemic, how we need to come together in those moments, in those direct actions. Wear the damn mask, get the vaccine, whip this virus, and then rebuild our economy. Start talking about infrastructure, talking about jobs, talking about the economy. And I'll tell you why. And I've said this for the longest time. The second people have hope and opportunity, second people are saying, "Hey, well, we can live the American dream. Maybe we can make it." The second that happens, the second all this conspiracy nonsense goes away, the second all this tear down the government goes away, for working people, for the people who are able to be duped into this, they are movable. Make their lives better. Now, the people who can get on a private jet and fly here from Texas, you're never reaching them. And look, we weren't going to get them anyway. For all those people who could afford to get on a plane and come to D.C., none of those people I want to reach at all. In fact, what we should have done is we should have kettled the whole crowd of them, every one of them, because those are the people, those are the problems. Now, the folks who are struggling, and I know some of these people. the people who are struggling to make ends meet, the people who are struggling to keep a roof over there, the people who through this pandemic have been the ones who are suffering and struggling. Those are the folks we got to reach out to. And we do that in a bunch of ways. We do that by, on the labor front, immediately doing something to protect workers on the job by using OSHA, pushing some new policies, some new regulations to protect workers on the job immediately. Also make it easier for workers to unionize and use the government's power to encourage collective bargaining. And maybe you do that through federal procurement. To me, this is central. And the other part, especially on the labor front, is make it much harder for employers to cheat employees by misclassifying them as independent contractors. Sorry, Lyft, Uber, DoorDash, give me this or that. This model that built billion-dollar companies off the backs of people who are just trying to feed their kids cannot go on and cannot be allowed to happen. Outside of that, we need a giant, huge, chunky infrastructure bill that's going to put people to work, rebuild our infrastructure, move us in a direction of a more cleaner, greener economy, and that the people who are building it actually get ahead. For too long, we've allowed this nonsense of, we're going to let all the money flow to the top and hope, and pray, lots of praying, that some of it will trickle down on the rest of us. And it never does it? At least not yet. And I know what the conservative argument is, but Rick, we haven't done it enough. We need to do more. We need to do more giving of wealth to the rich, because maybe one of them will be the Mackenzie Scott who then gives some of it back. And while I don't have a problem with Mackenzie Scott, I don't have a problem with her philanthropy, I do have a problem with the fact that you have so many people in this country who are starving and struggling and about to be homeless, and somebody with such obscene wealth that they made off the backs of the people who work for them. That's what I have a problem with. So for me, the message I want to hear from Joe Biden is we're going to reinvigorate the American dream. We're going to bring back reward to work. We're going to give people a path and an opportunity to make their lives and their families' lives better. For me, that's what I want to hear. False calls for unity, keep them. Just my thoughts. Love to hear yours. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back.
More American than workers standing up, and the union gives a voice to win. On the Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1909. That was the day the United States Supreme Court decided the case Moyers versus Peabody. The case grew out of the Colorado Labor Wars, a series of back-to-back strikes in 1903 and 1904 in the precious metals mines and ore mills. The Colorado National Guard meted out violent assaults, arrests, and deportations against strikers, often on orders from Colorado Governor James Peabody. The state militia routinely rounded up strikers and union leaders, detained them for weeks in bullpens, and ignored their habeas corpus petitions. Western Federation of Miners President Charles Moyer arrived in Telluride during a strike to find these repressive conditions. He signed a poster that read, "Is Colorado in America?" The poster included an image listing the many violations of basic democratic rights on the American flag. Moyer was arrested in March of 1904 for desecration of the American flag on the poster. He was detained on the grounds of military necessity, even after the courts ordered his release. His case traveled through the state and federal courts until the Supreme Court ruled. They held that the governor and officers of a state National Guard, acting in good faith and under authority of law, may imprison without probable cause a citizen of the United States in times of insurrection and deny that citizen the right of habeas corpus. The ruling radicalized the labor movement. Many concluded there could be no justice through the court system. A later case successfully challenged the ruling on the basis that the claims of insurrection were subject to judicial review. The ruling, however controversial, still stands today and was invoked after 9/11 in the 2004 ruling Hamdi versus Rumsfeld. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter @laborhistoryin2.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So it looks like Parler is back. That's right. The right-wing, rabid right-wing Twitter wannabe back online. And to be honest, it's interesting that they're going to be run through servers in Russia. We've got I can't get over this, to be honest. But it's just funny and a whole bunch of things all at once. And here to share some thoughts on, well, the humor in all this, I've asked our good friend Pete Dominic to come talk with us, comedian and host of Stand Up with Pete Dominic. Pete, thanks for taking time for us.
Rick, I am in Moscow now. I am here covering the Parler story, and I can answer all your questions.
All right, let's start with that. Why Russia? Why did they go to Russia? Why would they go there, given all of the stuff of the last 4 years, all of the stuff that, no, the Russians weren't involved. No. Why would they go there?
Because there are certain entities, corporations, and businesses that are completely unethical in terms of where and how they operate, where they might get their funding, and so on. And usually you can punish, shame, or boycott them into changing their ways. But when you are a social media site that is harnessing and hosting hate and making a profit off of it, usually no one's going to want to host that at some point. But you know who will? The Russians, because they have played this amazing foreign policy, well, really war game of asymmetric warfare. And it's really not that hard to do if you have no ethics and if you have no integrity as a nation state, which is obviously the case with them. And more importantly, if you're Parler, I mean, it's Parler. It's not like it's the Boy Scouts of America website that can't find a host. It's a social media site that hosts the worst kind of violent, threatening hatred that we could ever see, and nobody else can host that. We're not talking about pork and beans here, Rick Smith. We're not talking about, some sports station. This is the worst kind of threatening, dangerous terrorism, insightful hatred. And so, of course, the Russians are going to host it. That's the place to be.
Yeah. Well, I guess I'm not surprised. But I do to highlight your point. Acting Defense Secretary Christopher Miller did say last week that he was kind of impressed with Russia, how they played a bad hand really well. So, I mean, this is, I guess, part of that, right?
Well, I mean, did they play a bad hand really well? Did they get a bad hand? I'm not sure the context of that quote is coming from. But Donald Trump, worked with them. And, there are a lot of Americans. I think it's important to just admit, and I wish they would admit, maybe they do, that they're more supportive of Russia's style of government and Russia's culture, frankly, than they are of America's. I think it's hard for a lot of people to understand that most Americans that are living today didn't see the great red threat that communism posed. Now they see a country that is itself a white supremacist country. And that appeals to them. The authoritarianism appeals to them. They don't really know or care much about the history. What's wrong with Russia, Rick? I mean, it looks pretty good. It looks pretty good from my vantage point if I'm into MMA and having a video camera on my dashboard to film potential fraudulent insurance claims.
I love that.
You see those videos? You ever watch those videos?
I do.
They like purposely run into people to get the money, and so everybody puts a camera on their dashboard so they don't get grifted on the road.
Yeah, it's crazy, but that's what America's coming to. Speaking of lawsuits, are you surprised that Dominion Voting Systems is, I guess, threatening to sue? I guess not just Sidney Powell and a bunch of Trump's lawyers, but also now the MyPillow guy.
Well, the MyPillow guy, I used to actually do live reads for that company when I was at SiriusXM, probably over 5-6 years ago. And as a result, they gave me the MyPillow, because if I was advertising, the product on my show, I was gonna get one. to be able to talk about it authentically. But the
Right.
problem was I couldn't really say what I felt about it because I'm here to tell your audience, Rick, that the My Pillow is like sleeping on a bag of onions. I thought that someone was filming me. I'm like, is this a genuine product? Is this really supposed to be of comfort? Because maybe the My Pillow guy is going to come after me now for defaming his product. But I'm telling you, I would rather sleep on a bag of rocks than the My Pillow. Also, and if you get one of every 100 My Pillows comes with a golden crucifix worth $100. So yeah, you got to dig deep inside it. But the idea that Dominion is filing lawsuits against all the personalities, companies, Fox News, and has threatened them, and they had to put on those hilarious apologies on Lou Dobbs' show and others, it's hard to make a legal case for defamation, but not that hard. I mean, if you're going after a company in that way and you have that kind of influence, and you're saying something that is based on zero foundation of truth, which is what they've all been saying about Dominion, then you can make a legal case. And I don't know anything about the law, of course, in situations like this, Rick, but I do know that they all back down. They've all backed down and said, okay, we'll stop lying. Please don't, because clearly the Dominion company has good lawyers and a real case. But what if you said that about any other product? Night in and night out, you said that the eggs from this farm are killing people. They're poisoning and killing people, the eggs from this farm in Wisconsin. And the Wisconsin farmer's like, what are you talking about? My eggs are good. They're delicious eggs. No egg has killed anybody. Yeah, he would have a case too.
Yeah, but he wouldn't have the lawyers that they've got. So just a poor small farmer without a lawyer, you could probably get away with it.
I mean, at this point, who's left on his legal team? It's like Vanilla Ice and some guy who did one episode of The Soprano acting as a lawyer.
Maybe Lil Wayne. Evidently, Lil Wayne's getting a pardon.
Oh, who else is getting pardons, Rick? What are you hearing? Is Julian Assange getting one?
I haven't heard his name pop up, but I'm sure there's going to be a lot of surprise. I said on the day of the riot that I assume, I said I believe Trump will blanket pardon all of them because they were there for him. They were loyal to him. They made him very happy as he watched it on TV. The reports that I saw say he was gloating and gleeful, probably the first time in a while that he's been like that. So I'm expecting blanket pardons.
Well, I mean, I heard his friend Lindsey Graham come on and warn him not to do that on Fox News, Maria Bartiromo's great patriotic show. Lindsey Graham was on. He's like, I'm telling you right now, Mr. President. He was talking right to the camera because he knew the president was watching. Maria Bartiromo even asked me, he goes, "What? I know you wanted to say something to the president." And then he spoke directly through the camera and to Trump's tiny brain. And he was saying, he warned him. He's like, I'm telling you right now, Mr. President, whatever you do not pardon these people. That would tear us to pieces. And I especially don't pardon the man who was shirtless. Don't pardon him. He needs to stay right in jail because his torso, his glistening torso and the horns on his hat, they need to stay in the jail because we don't need him out here anymore making people feel uncomfortable about themselves. I thought was a really, really, he really went for it on that. I couldn't believe it. But, that's Maria Bartiromo's show. He gets pretty honest.
Yeah, that's great. I didn't see that, but I had heard. Immediately my mind goes, because I said it as it was happening. I go, he's going to pardon all these people. And the fact that a sitting U.S. senator has to come out and say, Mr. President, don't do that, to me speaks volumes of how crazy this guy really is.
Well, I mean, do we need any other evidence, Rick?
But every day there's something new that reminds us that we should have known. And that, I've been talking about this for the last 5 years, 5.5. We are where we were going to be, I believe. I remember on Inauguration Day, we said this is going to be horrible. These are going to be terrible 4 years, and they have been. I'll be honest, much worse than I ever thought they were going to be.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to look back at what my predictions were. Do I need this phone? Should I use my mic? I'm on the phone and I'm in my studio mic. I don't know if that'll work, Rick, but can you hear me? Anyway, whichever one works. I think that a lot of the worst case scenarios that we were concerned with were not necessarily, they didn't come through. And I think the worst of the worst case scenarios was that he was going to get reelected, and he didn't get reelected. And I think that, I don't know if you predicted or if anybody predicted the kind of pandemic that we've seen, but a lot of people certainly had the hypothetical scenario of some kind of national emergency or terrorist attack, and how would he take that? And clearly we have seen how he took and has taken the pandemic, and he hasn't at all. He hasn't been worried about it. And so I think that that's the thing that really no one could have predicted. But we're turning the corner, and I'm excited to see that we're going to have grown-ups who care about government, who have experience in government, who respect how government works, and who specifically have fought and thwarted pandemics from AIDS to Ebola for their entire careers. People like the Vice President, the Joe Biden, future President's Chief of Staff, Ron Klain, of course, Anthony Fauci will be elevated and listened to. It's going to be, there's a lot of really experienced scientists that are going to be running this. And I'm reminded of healthcare.gov, the Obama care website, when that crashed. That's what Biden's going to come in and do. He's bringing the smartest people in, and we're going to have a moonshot at vaccinating 100 million people in the first 100 days. And I think we get it done. I'm really feeling positive at the moment. Sometimes I feel alone.
I mean, just the fact that we're going to have competent people at the wheel, to me, is really, really incredible. I mean, to be honest, to me, it's just really incredible.
Yeah. I mean, it makes all the difference in the world when you have people running an agency of government or even running a business who care about doing a good job. And, the incentive for Republicans, unfortunately, when they're in charge of government, is to destroy government, to fulfill their prophecy that government is the problem. And it's obviously antithetical to their mission at the head of any of these agencies or working in these agencies, but that's what they do. It always changes that way. And so to have Republicans, rather Democrats, who have a lot of experience specifically in the agencies, they're experts. They're experts. Finally, it's someone, if something breaks down in your truck, Rick, the mechanic comes out and fixes the truck. Who doesn't come out? An actor, a comedian. Okay, that's not who you call. And so the metaphor is that Trump had the actor and the comedian running the garage, and you need to put a mechanic in charge of the garage. It's not very difficult to understand. It's the secret of my success with my entire media venture. I just find the smartest people I can to come on and talk to me. It's really not that difficult if you want to learn how to do a good thing well.
No, I'm right there with you. I need much smarter people than me to make me look smarter. I'm right there with you.
I know. That's why I'm wondering who canceled that you ended up with me tonight. some scholar is sitting around going, I couldn't make it to Rick's show tonight. I wonder who he had to get.
No, you're fantastic. Let me ask you. Wednesday we're expecting the inauguration. It's going to happen. One of the questions that I've been asking is, what's the right wing going to do once all of the fantasies of 190 people indicted, Joe Biden going to be one of them tomorrow, the March inauguration, what are they going to do when none of that happens and all of their conspiracy theory goes up in smoke? People indicted.
I mean, it's a really important question. It's a really important question. I think it's anybody's best guess, Rick. I really do, because my predictions on such things are as good as anybody's. But I think that we have to treat this threat the way that it should have always been treated by the FBI. I mean, recall when President Obama was president and his Department of Homeland Security Secretary was Janet Napolitano, former Arizona governor, tough as nails woman, and she, they put out a report and said their veterans were part, or a community that needed to be looked at as a potential domestic terrorist threat. Former veterans, former combat guys, they join up with these militia groups and so on. It's an obvious next thing for some of these guys. And they had to recall that, they had to take that out of that report from the Department of Homeland Security, because the right didn't think it was, they were offended by it, that you'd say that there were veterans, that there were white people, that there were Americans that were terrorists. And now we see, of course, there always have been, and there's always simply been way more. If you can do math, there's been way more attacks from white, right-wing domestic extremists. The FBI has all these numbers. And the media must do a better job at exposing this. We have to do a better job at making sure everybody knows what the true threat matrix is, and we have to resource that. And so I think that your question was, will it change? Will the fever break? Yeah, I think when you lock them up, and you prosecute them the way that you would any other terrorist, it gives people a second thought, especially some guy who's a weekend warrior who's getting poison poured into his ears every day by Sean Hannity and is getting angry and wanting to, take a shot at somebody. Well, you know what? That guy's got a family. He's got health insurance. Maybe he doesn't want to commit suicide by cop for the next D.C. revolution. So I think that you prosecute these people to the full extent that you can. You change laws. You resource the DHS, FBI to go after the people that they always should have been focused on, not some Muslim guy who just moved here from Morocco, who's got like a minimum wage job and no health care. He's doing 3 different jobs. He's just trying to make ends meet. And you're listening to his phone calls? Really? No. Listen to Cletus in the woods. Surveil that guy. And then arrest them and prosecute them the way they've always done it to these fake Al-Qaedas. Go after the Y'all-Qaedas, as people are calling them.
I'm right there with the last question I've got for you. Are you having as much fun watching these people be arrested as I am?
It's replaced pornography. I mean, the only other kind of video that I watch with that kind of zeal and zealotry and almost arousal. I mean, yes, I am. I mean, it's difficult sometimes because I do have some compassion for people who have been completely brainwashed. And you hear that one D.C. police officer who so eloquently and articulately talked about this zealotry in their eyes of the true believers that they are. And I think that's important that we all realize that a lot of these people really believe the craziest shit that's so hard for us to believe. That doesn't mean that we need to allow them to commit crimes. But we need to understand that some of these people are true believers, just like Al-Qaeda members are true believers, and we have to fight their ideas as well.
Yep, we got to go after the Christo-fascists and lock them up. I'm right there with you. Where's Rick Santorum when we need him? But, Pete, I appreciate the time, man. Always great talking with you, my friend.
Thank you so much for having me. I love you, Rick. I appreciate it, man.
I appreciate it back. Our good friend Pete Dominick. Make sure you check out his work at standupwithpetedominick.com. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. Have you ever worn a union button or T-shirt to work? On this day in labor history, the year was 1912. Members of the Australian Tramways Association in Brisbane, Queensland, decided to put on their union badges at work. The men operated and maintained the city's public transport system. For months before the action, their manager, an American named Joseph Stillman Badger, had banned wearing the badges. He wanted to thwart the union from growing in numbers. Before noon that day, the workers gathered together and donned their union badges by affixing them to their watch chains. And for that, they were promptly suspended from their jobs. They were told they could return to work if they took off the badges. The workers refused. That night, 10,000 people gathered in the city's market square in a rally to support the workers. The next day, 25,000 workers walked off the job and marched through the streets. A general strike was called for January 30th. 43 unions supported the strike. The police violently attempted to disband the strikers on February 2nd, a day known in Australia as Black Friday. Perhaps the most remembered event in the strike occurred when the famous feminist Emma Miller stuck her hat pin into the rump of the police chief's horse. The horse reared and sent him tumbling to the ground. The strike wore on for 5 weeks before it faded. At the end of February, the tramway employees were officially granted the right to wear their badges. But the company refused to hire back striking workers. The events at Brisbane were an important stand for free speech and the right to form a union. A question for today is, how far would you be willing to go to show your union pride. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
I think Pete had an interesting point. It is kind of the replacement for porn now. Watching these people cry. And one of my favorite videos is this woman from Tennessee who had just gotten maced or a little pepper spray. Now, evidently her boyfriend, husband, whoever was next door with his arm around her, he wasn't crying at all. There was nothing there. But she's like, I got a foot inside the door and then they maced me. And the guy goes, well, why were you doing it? He's like, she gave him this look like, what are you, a moron? It's a revolution, man. And I'm going, little pepper spray stop the revolution? Really? And that's the thing that gets me. And Pete hit on a couple of points there, because I know some of these way out whack extremists who they think they can get away with doing all of this stuff without consequence, that they can still have the wife and the kids in the house and the retirement accounts and all of the things that they've done really well over and still be able to have a revolution. And there'll be no consequences. And I think we're seeing that playing out. I mean, the woman who flew on a private jet to be part of this revolution and now begging for a pardon is like the epitome of entitlement. And where my mind goes, and look, before January 6th, one of the things that we were talking about here on the show is how do we reach out to Trump supporters and bring them in to get them to go, hey, we've got to figure out how we can agree and come to some common ground to get something done, to get us moving in a direction. Because I've personally always been, I don't care whose idea it was. If it's a good idea, we move on it. I don't care if it was conservative or liberal or Martian. I don't care. As long as we get what we need done. As long as kids get education, people get health care, folks have jobs, they can keep their homes, all of that stuff, retirement security, health security. As long as we can get to that point, I'm all in favor of it. Problem is one of the political parties in this country has not been on the same path as I've been. They've been on the path of how do we enrich the very wealthy and big corporations, and that would be the Republicans, and a good portion of Democrats do the same thing. One of my fears of Joe Biden is, being of the age he's in, lived through all the neoliberal years, and we're going to see a lot of neoliberalism over the next 4 years. I hope I'm wrong. From what I'm seeing so far, maybe I'm going to be, hopefully. But I want to join together with people who are going to push for positive changes. The folks who stormed the Capitol did so because they want to go backwards. I don't want to go backwards. I want to go forward. I want my kids to have better opportunities than I did, much like my grandparents had for their kids and my parents' generation had for their kids. Sadly, these folks wanted to kick us back to the 1950s. To some, made up version of what they think it was. And, anyone who questions their dominion is a communist. Had it happen today, a guy, just spouted off, you're all communists, and anyone who would, not vote for Donald Trump's communist. And I just, spell communism. I mean, let's start there. So for me, the number one thing Joe Biden can do is I don't think you call for unity. I think you show unity by doing things, by getting things done. Today, the guy who was the director of the Census Bureau said he's going to resign. They have boogered this thing up so badly. That I fear we're going to have to spend more money to get it done. And hey, you know what? Maybe we have to spend more money to get it done again. And that wouldn't be a horrible thing because we're going to need the jobs. But Biden's got a bunch of problems. The economy being a huge part of it. The pandemic being an even bigger problem. In these next 100 days, if we don't get this right, we don't get these vaccines into people's arms, and we don't get people willing to be vaccinated, there's not going to be the ability to recover the way we're not going backward. And we're just going to see numbers continually go higher and higher. And look, this is what the right has told us that they've wanted. And you could go into some conspiracy. Well, they just want to kill off old people and the sick, and this is the way to thin the herd, so to speak, in the most cruel fashion possible. Now, my frustration is the Democrats don't have absolute control. They're going to need some statesmen. They're going to need some Republicans in the Senate who are going to step forward and say, yes, we need to get things done. We need a big, chunky infrastructure bill. We need the ability to get money into workers' pockets so that they can support their families. There's a lot we need to get done. Hollow calls for unity. I mean, they're coming to the platitudes for unity that are going to be, thrown out in a hope that the people who aren't listening will come around. They're never going to. None of those people who are ravaging our Capitol, none of those people who are smashing windows and defecating on the floor and urinating on desks and stealing laptops like the woman here in Harrisburg, 22-year-old woman. Got busted. I guess in the most the most comical way. An ex-boyfriend. I would have to think she dumped him, but probably an ex-boyfriend turned her in. I guess they've arrested her because she stole this laptop out of the speaker's office and was going to sell it to the Russians. And again, all roads lead back to Russia, which is crazy. And I guess it's just because, when I grew up, the Soviet Union was our enemy. We were afraid of and angry at the Soviet Union. We practiced hiding under our desks for nuclear fallout. Again, I don't know how those desks were made. I'm not sure, how the nuclear winter was going to be averted by us being underneath them. But that's what we did. Just like, during hurricane drills, we went out into the hallway and put our heads between our knees. Again, not sure how that's going to help, but okay. Basement's usually where you want to be for that. But I'm watching all this stuff and all of this craziness. You're not going to reach these people. Let them go. Do what you need to do to make things better. And I say this every time a new president comes in. My number one goal for Joe Biden, outside of obviously the pandemic, is to return reward to work. Make work pay. The idea that if you work hard, play by the rules, you get ahead, that is the central tenet of what you do. The one thing that I agreed with Ronald Reagan on is the number one anti-poverty program that you can possibly come up with is getting people a job. And I would amend that to saying that the number one anti-poverty program that you can come up with is getting people union jobs with union wages and union benefits and union protections. And you're going to help keep them safer. You're going to help them live longer, and they're going to be happier. That's the reality. And we need to expand that. And I'm hoping Joe Biden's that guy. Now, he says he's going to. As I said in the opening, he's talking about doing something to get some workplace protections in place. I think that has to happen. He's talking about a cabinet level working group on expanding collective bargaining and encouraging collective bargaining. And look, this will be the first time in my lifetime that a president has said we're going to encourage people to join and form unions. We're going to use the power of the federal government to do that. Last polling numbers I saw were somewhere between 60 and 80 million people today would join a labor union if they were able to. And I've talked to people throughout the years who are like, yeah, I would absolutely, without a question, if I could get a union job, I'd do it in a heartbeat. But employers have had their hands around our necks like with a death grip for all these years, since the Taft-Hartley attacks, since the Reagan attacks of the 80s. So for me, there's so much that has to be done and that is going to happen. Now, I fully expect there to be lots of tension during this administration, so kind of get ready for it. I think you're going to see an uptick in the number of, at some, maybe not this year, but early next year, maybe even this year, an uptick in the number of workers who go on strike. We could have a historic strike year this year. And I look at this Hunts Point produce market in New York, who, something like 1,400 of them are going on strike. 1,400 of our essential workers, our essential heroes. Because they're talking about going on strike for $1 an hour raise. They're saying, look, if we were essential during the pandemic, if we were essential to keeping the tri-state area with produce, if we were essential to show up for work and do what needed to be done to keep the economy going, this company going, our country going, we deserve some dignity and respect on the job, and that comes with a better wage. And I think you're going to see a lot of that. And a lot of what they're talking about is also working conditions. Because they had a good number of people who were infected and said, for what? For me, this moment, and I've been saying this for a while, this moment, I think is awakening people to the reality that they don't have any rights at work. If you're an at-will employee, you've got no voice. You've got no say. The company will say, oh, we care. We care. Come and talk to us. Share your concerns. They never do anything. I mean, look at this. Look at the fact that there haven't been great big rollouts of getting people PPE. There haven't been the kind of things that we need to get for workers on the job. And that's because, well, most people sadly are powerless. And what I'm thinking what I'm hoping and what I'm thinking is coming out of this is you're going to see people finally going, we've had enough. Because there's only so much of what people are willing to eat. And look, this, I'm hoping this has opened some eyes and you see organizing. I know in the healthcare industry, from what I'm hearing from the nurses unions, their organizing is going through the roof because you've got these people who they had no say, they had no voice, and they're in the middle of they're in a war zone basically. There are people dying all around them every day. They're working in deadly conditions at any time they could possibly be infected. And the stress level, can you imagine? And then to have absolutely no say whatsoever. And the thing is, I look at the union that represents these Hunts Point produce workers. They haven't been on strike in over 35 years. Because the pendulum of power has swung way over to the side of the employer class. To where if you dare ask, if you dare demand a better wage, safer working conditions, better health care benefits, you're out the door. You're at will. They don't have to give you a reason for firing you. All they have to do is not fire you for one of the federally protected classes. Don't say dumb things to people, and you can fire anybody for anything. Wearing a yellow shirt today? Sorry, you're fired. That's actually happened. It was an orange shirt, but that actually happened. As opposed to a just cause condition where you have a contract, where you can only be fired because you did something horrible against the contract, because you were wrong. And I say to everybody, everybody should have a contract that protects their rights on the job, that protects their ability to support their families, and gives them a voice. Pete referenced my being a truck driver. And I loved his analogy of, if I break down, send a mechanic, not an actor and a comedian. Although the actor and comedian might be fun while I'm waiting for the mechanic, a little entertainment. But we need actual people who know what they're doing. Now, on my front, I don't know what it's like to be that kind of powerless. When I was driving, if there was something wrong with the truck, I didn't move it. I talk to truck drivers all the time who say, well, this is wrong, this is wrong. The company just told me I have to make it, or I have to, do questionable things. You should never have to break the law to have a job. And we're in a really weird time, which is why I have hopes for Joe Biden. I have hopes that he's going to follow through on being the most pro-union president in history. I have hopes that he is going to rebuild our infrastructure. I have hopes that he will use federal procurement to raise living standards and to raise economic standards for folks and to create jobs for everybody who would need them. As I've said a number of times, I'm not in support of handout programs. I want jobs programs, big ones. WPP, CCC type of huge building projects. Give people an opportunity to make a good living and then pay those wages at a level where people can live a decent life. Until we do that, none of this craziness that we're seeing, none of the insanity that the right has been able to stoke in the working class is going to subside. The person I saw today was a lower working class guy, and yet he's all in on a billionaire being president who hasn't done anything in the 4 years to make his life any better. How'd they do that? They did it by stoking the race card, by that racial fear, by dividing us, pitting us against one another. The Jay Gould quote, I could pay half the working class to murder the other half. We're seeing that play out right in front of us, aren't we? And the question then becomes, what do we do to stop it? And for me, it's Joe Biden doing the work that needs to be done. Rebuilding our economy, rebuilding our infrastructure, spending heavily. And that's going to take some Republicans. That's going to take some of them stepping forward and saying, yep, we're going to help. And maybe, some people were saying that, there's going to be a honeymoon period. Maybe Joe Biden gets a couple of Republican votes in the first 100 days. I personally don't think so. But it sure would be nice, wouldn't it? It would sure be nice if maybe just one. Just one. Because that's the start. Love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back. Stick around.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1943. On this day, marking the death of the first woman general organizer appointed by the American Federation of Labor, Mary Kinney O'Sullivan was born the only child of working-class Irish immigrants in Hannibal, Missouri. She worked at a printing and binding factory in Missouri, and then moved to Chicago for work in the city's binderies. She helped organize the Chicago Women's Bindery Workers Union. Mary Kinney O'Sullivan became friends with Settlement House social worker Jane Addams. The newly formed bindery union held their meetings at Addams' Hull House. O'Sullivan joined another champion for working people, Florence Kelly, on her investigation of sweatshops and slums in Chicago. O'Sullivan was one of a group of women who rose to national prominence as organizers for progressive change. Her work caught the attention of Samuel Gompers, president of the AFL. Gompers named O'Sullivan the AFL's first female organizer in 1892. In 1893, O'Sullivan was one of the main speakers, along with Florence Kelly, at a rally organized by Hull House and the Chicago Trades and Labor Assembly. 1,000 people heard her speak that day. The purpose of the rally was to demand inspections of the conditions in the city's factories. Later that year, the Illinois governor signed the State Factory Inspection Act. The next year, O'Sullivan married John O'Sullivan, the labor editor of the Boston Globe. She relocated to the East Coast, where she continued to fight for workers' rights. And thus we remember Mary Kinney O'Sullivan, who was one of the leading voices of her time for improving workplace safety in Chicago and throughout the United States. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com Like us on Facebook and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
The ransacking and terrorizing of Congress by violent trumpeters is an outrage, right? Even Republican congressional leaders have rushed to assail the mob invasion, calling it a desecration of America's democratic ideals. For example, the GOP Senate leader, Mitch McConnell, denounced the invading outsiders as thugs, lecturing that self-government, quote, requires a shared commitment to truth and shared respect for the ground rules of our system. But wait, what about the insider mob? The lawmakers who routinely run roughshod over our ideals of equality and justice. So many of the pious members who are now so prissily crying out for decorum and respect for the process openly solicit special interest cash to do favors for the donors, while ignoring the basic needs of workaday people they supposedly represent. Excuse me, Mitch, but for the past 4 years, weren't you Trump's most destructive Machiavellian monkey wrencher in Congress? Yes, you were, relentlessly stomping on truth and rigging legislative ground rules to ram his plutocratic, autocratic agenda into law. You even stoked his depraved narcissism. For weeks after it was clear that Joe Biden had won the presidency, you cynically fed Trump's fantasy that he had won, helping spread a furious disunity across America. The mob that you deplore for rampaging into your inner sanctum of power and privilege is of your own making. They're your angry political chickens coming home to roost. It's a scream and a disgrace to see not only McConnell but also self-aggrandizing icks like Ted Cruz now posing as righteous statesmen. Cruz unctuously proclaimed, "We must come together and put this anger and division behind us." This is Jim Hightower saying, so let's also shine the light of justice on the mob of insider elites who so selfishly continue desecrating American democracy.
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's take on what Wall Street and Washington are up to. For information, visit hightowerlowdown.org.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So today the big news was Joe Biden's going to cancel the Keystone X-Line pipeline permit, which got all of the righties crazy at me. See, he hates workers. I'm going, no. It's not what he's saying. He's saying let's take their talents away from building pipelines and move them to building things that are going to move us towards a greener, healthier economy, and not just a pipeline that we're going to get one shot out of, and then for the next 50 years be stuck on the dirty stuff. But boy, were they crazy angry. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on, the big inauguration on Wednesday. Looking very much forward to hearing what Joe Biden has to say. I've asked our good friend Greg Hurwitz to come talk with us. Greg is a New York Times best-selling author. Make sure you check out his website, greghurwitz.net. Greg, thanks for taking time for us.
How you doing? Good to be back.
It's good to see you again. What do you think? Let's start with the Keystone XL pipeline. Do you think day one he rescinds the permit?
I don't know what he's going to do on day one. I think every argument that he makes on any matters that are environmental should be about job growth and creation and innovation. I think that's the whole deal. There's an unbelievable opportunity to be seized in terms of job creation and infrastructure. And if we lean into that, we're going to be good. If we don't, we're going to be in trouble.
No, that's been my whole take on all of this. If we're gonna get those on the Trump train to come around to some bit of sanity, not the conductors and not the people doing the work, but the people who are riding along, if we can get some of them into the sane world by making people's lives better, by making these investments in infrastructure and the jobs that come along with it, I think that goes a long way.
Well, and that's right. For a long time, I think that the messaging of the left, not the work of, I don't want to say the left, the messaging of Democrats and liberals has been hijacked. We've been very focused on sort of language and permission structures rather than intentions and outcomes. And if we can get back to actually stating in concrete terms what we can do for American people and why that's something that can be accomplished, that's the whole agenda. The quicker we can get out of ideological back and forth and the closer we can get to rolling out a vaccination that's effective, creating more jobs, and making more money for workers who deserve to make more money, the better shape we're going to be in. That's the argument.
Absolutely.
There's a window right now, I feel like a lot of the suburban women who sort of, deserted Trump, who voted for Trump and then left and are over. If we can make good and claim the working class at this point, I mean, you're a union guy, you know this better than anyone. If we can see that through properly in the messaging, in the policies, in the platform, I think we're in great shape. If we want to get pulled into the culture wars, I think we're dead.
I absolutely agree with you, and that's why I keep looking at Wednesday, going. I know there's going to be some calls for unity. There's going to be some olive branches and all of that, but ultimately it's going to come down into the nuts and bolts and the policies that he pursues, which for me it's all about jobs, jobs, jobs.
That's right. And when I talk about the culture wars, by the way, I'm not claiming that we leave or take for granted the communities that are suffering, that keep delivering wins to Democratic leadership or have. It's not about that, but it's about actually tackling the root causes of things. And so when we're dealing, we have to look at the communities that are suffering. Who do we have? We have white working class, we have the African-American communities, we have brown communities. And if we can have a targeted approach at, say, the prison industrial complex, if we can get things done instead of talking about things, we're going to be in better shape for those communities. I think it's essential.
No, I'm right there with you. So, let's take a step back real quick, because I want to get some of your thoughts on what happened on January 6th. I think a lot of people were shocked that, oh my God, I can't believe this happened. Personally, I expected it. I expected, honestly, much worse. Because of just having read, now that Parler's back, I get to get the inside track on the crazy that's there. But because I read what they were saying, I read the intentions that they went to Washington, D.C. thinking. I read them saying, hey, if someone tries to take my gun, I'm stacking up bodies. I was expecting it. How is it that we completely missed this? And I'm curious what your thoughts of what happened.
Well, I think anyone who paid attention to history or the present moment was not surprised. But I think a lot of us are not paying attention to history or the present moment, right? We're siloed in our different information bubbles. That's been talked about exhaustively. This is a very logical outcome of what we have seen happening. And people weren't prepared to look it in the face. And what's weird is, there was a weird sense I had of violation that felt different. Those images, the Confederate flag marched through the hallways of the Capitol. It didn't get within 5 miles during the Civil War. People wearing, 6 million Jews wasn't enough. And I was glad it happened. I was delighted it happened. I thought the solution for anything is to pull it out under the full sterilizing light of day. And I think we all need to see that. We needed to see how extreme it was, and we needed to look it in the face. And there's a lot of people, John Dean talks a lot about how this sort of how you have to break frame, how you're moved within a sort of bubble further and further off the mark of a particular morality. And I feel like this is a frame break that a lot of people were still in denial of, including Ben Sass, who's back on the floor talking about shoveling your neighbor's driveway. People didn't seem to realize there was a murderous takeover of the Capitol building. And so as far as I see it, there's two messaging and strategic and moral imperatives. And all three of those to me are aligned. They're not different. That the Democratic Party and any reasonable thinking liberal should have. One of them is to offer an off-ramp for the enormous percentage of Republicans who that movement is not, who don't see themselves in that movement, who aren't down with the Confederate flag, who aren't down with people literally beating police officers to death with fire extinguishers and beating them with the Blue Lives Matter flags. And to offer an off-ramp at this point to say, look, there's a lot churning in the underground, and here's the off-ramp where you can get off and understand that we have to pull back from the brink of this. But I think there also has to be a serious level of accountability for what just happened and occurred at the Capitol. I think that it was a coup, and I think it was sedition. And I think that we have to have no holds barred going after the people who instigated and carried out that act. It was horrific.
No,
at this point,
I'm right there with you. And I'm of the mindset that you can't begin talking about unity until you have that kind of accountability. And because I don't think you can do both simultaneously. I think you have to go and all those people who were part of this they have to be brought out in the light of day.
I think the vast majority of Americans were horrified by that. We have 75 million Americans who voted for Trump, 74 and change. I don't know the exact percentage of people who supported the Capitol attack. We have 80 million who didn't vote, right? And we know where the 80 million, was it 80 million who voted for Biden or some such, 80 something?
A little bit over.
But I think that most people, as more stories get out of what occurred and how that was, and people with zip ties and planning to take hostages, and people who had roadmaps, not just to particular Senate offices, but to their hideaways. And, Rick, I mean, you've probably been to the Capitol building. That place is impossible to navigate. I mean, I can't get through there. People knew right where they were headed. There was a lot going on there. And I think we were enormously close. I mean, a strike team of capable Russians armed with Kalashnikovs could have gone in and wiped out our whole government. 20 people with a clear mission plan. It was horrifying what happened. And I feel like there's a shattering of denial that is still occurring about how bad this got and how close we came. And I think we're going to see the repercussions of that and the undeceiving of that continue to unfold over the next months.
Yeah, I mean, it's and to highlight your point, I don't think most people understand exactly the magnitude because I don't think that we've seen enough of the video yet. I don't think we've seen enough of the stories of the people who were there and their intentions, and that will come with the trials, and that will come with clearly in the investigations that are coming. But you're right. We were very close to having our whole government wiped out, and you brought up Ben Sass's name. I can't help but think of, had they found those senators, would Ben Sass have been in the line of those who they were possibly going to hang in the gallows that they were building outside?
Well, if they were willing to hang and chanting that they were going to hang Mike Pence, I can't imagine he wouldn't be on the hit list as well. So I think it's confusing. I think a lot of people who went to the Capitol were really deceived. I think they really are true believers who thought that the democracy had been undermined, that there was like an evil cabal of people who were undermining the effort. They seem to have forgotten the fact that, 60 courts ruled against this, 90 judges and 60 courts.
Right.
I believe it was 60-1. I forget if there was the one was a motion maybe that was granted. Largely Republican courts, right, in red states who dismiss this. But we have to wrangle back from the edge, and it's almost like it's an addiction, right? An addiction to misinformation, an addiction to moral outrage. And look, we've seen a counterpart of this on the left. I think that the left has hardly, covered themselves in glory in terms of dividing the voices that are the most extreme on the far left. I just think that those voices, there's a massive underweighting of how dangerous those voices are. People point to stuff in the culture, right, in academia that is preposterous. There's a lot of stories that come out that are just common sense, lowest common denominator, ridiculous of things that are said and stated. But, when you get within our party, I mean, AOC endorsed how many candidates, for the midterms, none of them won. She sent the Green New Deal, which was sort of a Trojan horse for more leftist policies, to the Senate floor. Didn't get a single vote, right? So we have very extreme, I don't want to say very extreme. I don't want to categorize her that way, but the furthest left elements of our party are not empowered, right? But they're empowered in academia. They're empowered in the mainstream media. And people somehow conflate that and don't understand that what we just saw was as if somebody from the other side, this is someone with the nuclear football. This is someone with the full power of the Senate and the judicial, right, or the DOJ behind them. And people aren't understanding how to weight these things because I think that the voices from the far left have a pretty big bullhorn in our culture, but that's not where the party is and lives. The biggest caucus in the House is the new Democrat coalition, moderate, pro-capitalism. I mean, if you look at the first resolutions the House passed upon winning the midterms in 2018, what were they? It was like bipartisan for violent history checks, lowering prescription drug prices. HR 1 was for anti-corruption. I mean, this is like enormously reasonable mainstream bipartisan measures that are passed. So the Democratic Party has been, the messaging of it has been so ineffective. And that's part of why I put a lot of my energy and efforts into the messaging, because the messaging is everything in some ways in the InfoWars.
So now you've got Joe Biden, who I saw as a more centrist candidate, and probably the right candidate for this moment. He's the right guy for this moment. Do you see that coming out in his policy as we go past inauguration day into these first 100 days?
Yeah, I think he's the only candidate who could have won. I mean, it's amazing. It was like we needed a plague. It was almost like, it's so weird. There's this weird, almost like karmic inevitability. Like Trump got elected. What did he need? He needed to run against, an incredibly qualified but terrible candidate in Hillary Clinton, meaning she was brilliant and capable, but as a candidate, she was left a lot to be desired. We needed Comey, right? We needed Russia. We needed this weird event of Donald Trump. But the same thing holds true here. I mean, I think if we didn't have COVID, we'd be looking at, 4 more years of Donald Trump and seeing what happened at the Capitol. I think it might have been the last free elections that we might have had.
No, I'm there with you. And I also say, had Mitch McConnell allowed a stimulus package to go through, and those checks go out in October, I think he'd have won. I think he would have won then too.
It was like every single, and also had we been within 50,000 votes, I think that the mechanisms were in place for him to cheat and overpower the system through misinformation. I mean, we came unbelievably close. And so for me, the question is, how do we win people over? I mean, I spent much of the last 4 years making what I hoped were good faith arguments. Look, this to me is sort of everything right now, Rick. I've been thinking about this a lot. There's sort of 2 types of people who can lead in the culture and in politics. And one are the people who sort of consolidate leadership, who are impassioned, who organize and go forth and fight. And they're the leaders on that front. And there's another group, and I'm talking about journalists, politicians, people in pop culture, who reach out and extend and do sort of surveillance and interaction of the other side. They engage the other side for meaningful compromise, ideally to win people over, but at a minimum to figure out what the hell is going on over there, right? And to figure out, what are the mechanisms? Can I argue with you? Can I cajole? Can we, is there a compromise to be had? In the best case, you want to win people over. In the worst case, you have to understand them because they're going to be the enemy. They're going to be the people who are beyond inability to compromise with. And we have spent so much time denigrating that second group. And as far as I'm concerned, for any movement, political or cultural, to be successful, we need both groups. And it seems like every time you look on Twitter or mainstream media, there's people raging. I don't want to see one more profile of understanding these people. I don't want to see one more thing about people going into a diner and talking about Trump voters. Similar stuff from the other side to us. If we don't elevate and celebrate those people to figure out a way forward with the 75 million Americans who voted for Donald Trump, who we are not just married to, we are handcuffed to them. And the 80 million people who didn't just, who are capable of voting, who didn't deem this election worthy of voting in, we're dead. And so we have to elevate both sides. And elevating people who are doing reconnaissance and interfacing with the opposition and the other side, that's not an abdication of our values. It's an elevation of understanding that in a democracy, there's all sorts of different groups. And that the only thing that gets done in America tends to be by compromise, and it tends to be a solution where not everyone gets what they want. Right. And we need that now. And Biden is somebody who exemplifies that. And I'm hoping that in the cultural and political conversation, we can start to elevate and even celebrate voices who are willing to go across and figure out what's going on and find a way forward, because we need those people piloting out who are, boots on the ground out in that direction.
No, I'm right there with you. And in fact, before January 6th happened, one of the things that we were doing here at the program is saying, how can we reach these people? In fact, we've partnered with a center right platform, ThinkSpot, to try and reach that audience to have these conversations. Because I've always said that I can sit down with anybody. I don't care what you believe, what your ideology is. We can sit down, have a beer, we can talk about things, and we can find common ground. I truly still believe that. But our society's telling us we can't do that.
That's right. And I will go anywhere and talk to anybody in hopes of winning them over, in hopes of talking to new audiences and making different arguments that fit with their value structure. And the thing is to do that, there's a certain amount of kind of grit and courage that's required to be a Joe Biden, to do the things that you're doing. Because what happens is you're going across the aisle, you're leaving the parasol, the protective parasol of your own ideology, of your in-group, right? You're leaving to go forth. Sometimes you're even taking arrows in your back to have the conversation. They're difficult conversations to have, right? And then you have to kind of have these difficult conversations, see what sort of headway can be made. You have to hold your heart open to being, I believe you can't ever convince somebody of changing their mind if you're not in a position of allowing your own mind to be changed, especially in an environment that's this polarized. It's basically like I'll show you my blind spots, you show me yours, right? It's tough. And then we kind of walk back across to our aisle and often get shouted down or yelled at for being a turncoat. And there's no way forward with that. We basically have an equal number of people on the two sides. We have an equal number of people in the middle of voting age. And we have to start to find ways to have these conversations meaningfully. And if we don't do it, we're dead, or we're just sort of in perennial warfare.
No, because, one of the things that I'm hoping to hear out of Joe Biden's inauguration is this idea that we're going to make people's lives better. I talk about this all the time on the program as a union guy. I said it earlier. The one thing I agreed with Ronald Reagan on is that the best anti-poverty program is a job. I've amended that to the best anti-poverty program is a union job with good wages, health security, retirement security, and security on the job. By having a say in your working conditions. If we can start moving in that direction to where people see a future, believe that the American dream is possible, I think a lot of these problems correct themselves. I think we're able to move in a direction that makes people's lives better, and that some of this fringe stuff people are willing to stay away from.
That's right. And if we do concrete things, like imagine if the Democrats had a single-minded purpose of addressing, for instance, the sentencing inequities between, like the differences in sentencing guidelines between whites, I'm going to just talk about race for a moment, and black and brown accused. It's enormous. It's unfair. It's incredibly easy to talk about and frame in terms of righteousness, in terms of the law. The prison industrial complex is absurd. Anyone who watches Ava DuVernay's 13th will walk away from that and go, right, there's a whole frame on that of systemic injustice in a way that makes immediate sense under the umbrella of fundamental common sense fairness. If we could start to make headway in those ways, I think a lot of the other symbolic value struggles or symbolic battles that we have closer to the surface and the divisiveness can start to fall away. Likewise, for me, the biggest stat that I always return to is the fact that $50 trillion with a T in the last 40 years since Reagan have moved from the bottom 90% to the top 1%, not through free market means, right? That's through lobbyism, that's through loopholes, that's through government bailouts, that's through stock buybacks, that's through all sorts of other stuff. And some of this is due to globalization. I'm not an economist. Even economists, I feel like, don't ever have a handle on everything. But it's from not playing fair, right? And so when we talk about union jobs, when we talk about people who should just be able to work a job and fundamentally have the dignity of work, as Sherrod Brown talks about, to make a living and support your family, it's not that we're asking for some, crazy socialist readjustment of the system. What we're saying is, hey guys, let's go back and look at the TARP bailouts. Let's look at how the COVID pandemic money was handed out by Trump. Are you calling that literally free market? Like, is that money that went out on the basis of innovation and competition? Absolutely not. So we've had this incredible transfer of wealth, the opposite direction of what everyone is so afraid of in a sort of socialist frame. And part of, I think, what we're talking about is to talk about getting back to the actual fundamentals of free market capitalism, competition, innovation, right? And having workers be able to work for a functional wage. And if you can't see that, if you're rich or in the ruling class, and you can't understand that makes sense to fundamentally build a smarter capitalism all the way down the pyramid and all the way up, you've never read strategy. Like, do you want to wait 20 years and have somebody who's actually is a socialist come in and take over because the wealth divide is so great that people are only living in gated communities guarded by people with, it just doesn't make any sense.
No,
And
to highlight your
of-
point, I have a friend who grew up in Brazil, and he tells the story of the inequality there, where if you do fairly well, you're living behind a wall, worried about somebody snatching your kids,
Right.
and this is the direction we're heading.
Feel like
Sadly,
freedom? Does that feel like freedom?
No.
Right? Does that like? And the bottom line is, for me, when people are doing well, where liberals tend to fail is by celebrating that, to say, good for you, right? Like, you built a business, you made a ton of money, you're worth a ton of money, good on you, and we celebrate that. But make sure that we're keeping the system fair all the way down, so that if you're doing great this year and in 3 years, we want you doing great in 5 years, 10 years, and 20 years. The system itself has to be robust. It has to be fair so that it doesn't get overthrown. So you don't want to do a quick cash grab if we're at a point like, one of the things I talked about, I went on a podcast, I went in Jordan Peterson's podcast that was just released this morning. And one of the things I was talking to him about, his audience, he's a centrist, but his audience tends center right, I would say. One of the things I was saying to him was, everyone's complaining about like socialism and how stupid people are and how dare they talk about being democratic socialists. And part of the accountability that I think is required from anybody is to say, how much has the system of capitalism failed that people are literally picking up an idea, a shiny idea, as stupid and as failed as socialism, right? And considering that as a reasonable alternative to the corruption, to the ingrained corruption they've seen through 40 years of Republican and Democratic leadership in capitalism. We can scorn them all we want, or we could look at it in terms of accountability and say, how far afield have we gone from people being able to realize the American dream, that's something they're even considering, given the track record of socialism.
right? But here's the thing, and there's a lot of people who misdefine what socialism is, and they throw a lot of definition in with it. You believe, as I get, free market. I'm a more regulated free market guy. I'm more of the idea of going back to what we did during the FDR years, where you took off some of the razor edge of what capitalism has become. Because at the end of the day, in a truly free, laissez-faire capitalist system, doesn't the guy with the most power end up winning all the time? I mean, if you go back and the monopoly is the guy with the most money wins, and that's what we're told free market, laissez-faire capitalism is. Isn't that where we end up?
Well, I agree with you. I just think that when you talk about taking the edge off, for me, I frame that as corruption and power plays. I don't frame that as to me, an actual free market encourages innovation. It encourages competition. And that's not what we have been seeing.
Right.
From the enormous, multinational corporations. We're not seeing that. And so, I agree with you. I think that part of lifting that is when people can have lobbyists literally send bills to Congress without bothering to remove the letterhead from the lobbyist firm, right? When we have, I forget the ratio. It's unbelievable, the number. It's something like 90 lobbyists. I might be wrong on this. It's an inordinately high number of lobbyists per member of Congress for big pharma. We don't get anything through. And so part of taking the edge off it with regulation is just making sure people don't cheat. So you can get up the system. It's not free market to get up to the top of the dominance hierarchy financially and then pull the ladder up after you and change the laws and change loopholes and take enormous cash bailouts, right? From TARP, from the COVID pandemic relief packages in a way that has nothing to do with the free market. So I'm in agreement with you. I just think there's a way we can frame it and talk about it that appeals to a broader range of centrists and to libertarians. It's just, for me, it's a different way to frame and look at it. But you've seen the math, right? CEOs I want to say in the 80s were making 300x what their workers were. Now they're making 3,000. Did they get that much smarter? Like they're really that much brilliant in the last 20 years? Absolutely not. So some of the effects of globalism have gotten to this winner takes all game where these corporations have as much power as nation states.
And that is a huge problem. So let's bring this back to kind of wrap it up. Wednesday, Biden's going to give his speech. Does any of this come out in this? What are you expecting Joe Biden to say? And what do you want to hear?
I'd love to hear him talk about, one of the things that I think hurt us enormously when Hillary Clinton was running was she would carve up the communities, right? She would list a whole bunch of communities that she was running or appealing to. And not listed in a lot of them were sort of white working class. People forget we have 80 to 100 million white evangelical voters in the United States of America. And I think it's important that when Biden talks about, there's a lot he owes. I don't think we win this election as liberals without the African-American community.
Correct.
Full stop, right? Stacey Abrams, Clyburn, go down the list. But I think he should be talking about communities that are suffering. I would like to see an emphasis placed on that. I would like to see an emphasis placed on getting COVID relief, getting financial relief to communities who need jobs, right? That's African-American community. I'm sure this has been even worse. At a time, 1 out of every 1,000 African-Americans had already died of COVID. I'm sure that number is worse now, right? But we have white working class communities who have been just ravished by the opioid epidemic, right? And if you lay a map over them, right, that's a lot of the Trump voters. He's got to reach out to communities that are suffering. And I think that I want to see that to be a sort of an outreach. And the other thing is we have to have him figure out how to actually pass governance. We have to pass bills. We have to govern. And that involves compromise. It involves unity, and it involves working with the other side. And I think that after the sort of abuse and corruption of the Trump era, people are sitting back and just thinking that we can go, certain people are hoping there's an administration that can go sort of scorched earth. It's not going to work. It's not how legislation and governance works. It's not how votes work in the House or the Senate. It's not how Democrats win and hold seats in purple districts. Democrats like Lucy McBath in Georgia, Democrats like Alyssa Slotkin in Michigan and Haley Stevens. And our passions are not the only passions that there are. And we have to remember that there's a giant range of people who are suffering, who are passionate, who are different communities who need different things. And we have to widen our lens beyond the sort of funnel that we've gotten of information that has narrowed us to believe that our passions are the only ones.
We will see what comes out of it. I'm looking forward, and I'm after this darkness, it's kind of like going to the light. I have great hopes for this president. I have great hopes for him to do the things that we need in the moment that we need them, and to put the smart people into the right places, so that we don't have the failures that we've had. But we'll see. And Greg, it'd be great to have you back and share some thoughts on the other side. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, it's always good talking to you, Rick.
Good stuff. Our good friend Greg Hurwitz, New York Times bestseller. Check out his website, greghurwitz.net. We'll get links out on social media how you can check that out. Gonna take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
Rick Snyder and several other officials will have to answer for the scandal in court.
Ex-governor of Michigan criminally charged in Flint water crisis. Trump EPA's parting gift to polluters, severe restrictions on all future pollution regulations. U.S. emissions plummet.
Good.
Due to coronavirus.
Oh.
Plus, world's biggest battery farm now online in California.
All of those stories online and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
Where's your snarky comment?
Well, I banned Donald Trump from the Green News Report, so I got nothing.
Sad.
I know. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, it has been years and years and years, it seems, but maybe a little bit of accountability finally in Flint, Michigan?
Yes, former Michigan Governor Rick Snyder has been charged with 2 counts of willful neglect of duty for his role in the Flint water crisis. In 2014, an unelected manager appointed by Snyder ordered the city's water supply switched to the polluted Flint River to save money. The untreated water leached lead from pipes, poisoned poisoning the city's drinking water, and then state officials failed to act long after scientific evidence showed that residents in the predominantly black city were suffering from toxic lead poisoning, which causes health ailments and learning disabilities in children.
18 months later before they acted on it.
The switch also caused an outbreak of Legionnaire's disease that killed 12 people. The new charges are a welcome step in accountability and recovery for Flint, according to Democratic Representative Dan Kildee in an interview with WXYZ in Detroit.
Justice for the people of Flint comes in lots of different forms. Making things right for the people of Flint is an important part of that, but a very important part is holding the people who did this to Flint responsible.
Snyder's lawyer called the charges meritless. If convicted, the Republican Snyder faces up to a year in jail and a $1,000 fine.
Yeah, a $1,000 fine. These are 2 misdemeanor charges. He'll never go to jail for a year. He probably won't even go to jail for a day. I think those lawyers ought to be thanking prosecutors at this point rather than complaining about it.
In Washington, the Trump Environmental Protection Agency launched a surprise attack on the incoming Biden administration's ability to tackle man-made climate change. Less than a week before President-elect Joe Biden takes office on Wednesday, as Trump was being impeached for the second time for inciting the attack on the U.S. Capitol, his EPA finalized a new climate rule that effectively prohibits all future limits on greenhouse gas emissions from any stationary industrial source other than power plants. The new rule sets a threshold designating any industry responsible for less than 3% of national emissions as exempt from all future emissions regulations permanently. It may sound small, but that threshold actually exempts prolific polluters like oil and gas production and refineries. The Biden administration and Congress can take actions to repeal the new rule, but it is just one of the many tangles and traps set by the Trump administration that will take time and focus to unravel.
But with Democrats in the majority in both the House and Senate, they can simply overturn it with the Congressional Review Act, right?
Right, but they have a lot of crises on their plate to deal with.
Yeah, they're going to be busy.
Trump EPA political appointees also interfered with scientific assessments of a specific type of forever chemicals in drinking water. PFAS chemicals used in firefighting foam, carpeting, and food packaging are linked to numerous ailments. Politico reports that appointees at EPA overruled the agency's career scientists to weaken a major health assessment for the toxic chemicals, which contaminate the drinking water of nearly 1 million Americans.
Can that be overturned as well with the Congressional Review Act?
No, that's a health assessment, which means the Biden EPA would have to go back and do the entire process of reassessing all over again.
Oh, you're right. They're going to have a lot of work ahead of them.
Good news, but for the worst possible reason, U.S. annual greenhouse gas emissions in 2020 fell by the greatest amount since World War II, 10%, according to a new estimate by the Rhodium Group. Global annual emissions also dropped more than 7% in 2020, but it's no cause for celebration because it's due to the coronavirus pandemic slamming the brakes on the global economy. The drop was temporary and emissions will climb again as the economy recovers, but it does conclusively demonstrate that structural changes to reduce fossil fuel use will succeed in delivering big emissions reductions. Finally, one of the big structural changes to reduce greenhouse gas emissions is now underway in the U.S. Just 5 years ago, a utility-sized battery project of 20 megawatts was considered big. Now a 300-megawatt project, the largest in the world, has gone online in California. And an even bigger battery storage project is slated to come online in Florida by the end of 2021. Just one of many. So there's that.
There's that. I'll take it. For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
This is interesting. James Murdoch, the son of Rupert Murdoch, was interviewed by the folks at The Guardian. And he has condemned U.S. media for propagating lies, which he said has unleashed insidious and uncontrollable forces that he says are going to endure for years. He said there's got to be a media reckoning. He said that the damage is profound. He said that the sacking of the Capitol was proof positive that what we thought was dangerous is indeed very much so. Those outlets that propagated lies to their audience have unleashed what he called insidious and uncontrollable forces, adding that they're going to be here a while. Wouldn't directly say it was Fox News' fault, however, but you got to imagine that is part of it. So the fact that he even brings this up, pretty amazing stuff. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on, well, the big inauguration, just a day and a half away. Cannot wait. I've asked our good friend Bob Ney to come talk with us, former congressman and political analyst. Bob, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you.
So I'm looking at this statement by James Murdoch. Is he wrong?
Well, I think obviously that people were, coming to the realization that the media kept the hype going, and of course Fox News is going to come under the gun for this. Now, is anybody going to do anything about it, or something happen, or how can you do something about it? Fox News would say, well, we had the right to report the news. What was questioned, we had the right to comment on it. We didn't tell anybody to storm the Capitol. Is probably what their answer is going to be.
Yeah. Now, you could make the argument that there isn't a balance on the other side, or that we've got these ideological networks now, and I hear people telling we need to go back to the fairness doctrine, and you're not putting that genie back in the bottle.
Well, yeah, and also it's just like there comes a point. I've really been trying to think about this, in a fair manner. I don't know where personally, I'm going on this yet, but there does come a certain point too. You might get what you don't want, where, they want certain censorship people do of Facebook or whatever, and then all of a sudden Facebook turns on them. I don't know how that's all regulated. Both sides will claim that Facebook is treating them unfair, for example. It happens. I just don't know if you tell Zuckerberg, you meaning the government, tell Zuckerberg, you've got to monitor all these things. What does he monitor, and how does he choose to monitor? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, you can easily put things into those searches and just blanket eliminate everything. And you're right. It could be and this is where I do have some problem with banning Trump a very little bit. But he has been violating their terms of service for years now. I mean, this was coming.
Well, and also dictators did. The Iranians have a Twitter account, and then I'm looking at that. I'm like, okay, they didn't move on them when they said all kinds of things. But then again, do you really move on them? I don't know. It's one that, Rick, I don't have an answer to it. I just think we have to be careful of how much power we give to these platforms or force them to regulate in general free speech. I think there's a cautionary point, and some of this too, when we're attempting to purify everything. And I understand when Trump said basically go get the Vice President of the United States, he can stop it. But then again, there's a bill introduced that no one can name anything after Trump. Well, okay, it's for certain things. It's time to get to other issues. I'm not sure you can do that. There's just a stopping point, no matter how upset people get. So
yeah, I think there are a lot of bathrooms that need to be renamed.
I figured you'd say that. Actually,
I'm not against slapping his name on some things.
Or something that's not gaudy could be renamed.
There you go.
That would infuriate them.
No, I think once he's gone, I do believe that if he does go away and maybe we don't hear from him for a while, maybe Twitter keeps him off and the other media kind of stays away and he doesn't garner the kind of dominance in our daily lives that he's enjoyed for the last 5.5 years. I think maybe some of this taps down and we can begin having those conversations of how we wake up from these 4 years and move forward as a country.
Because I think that I'm going to be curious to see what Biden says in his inaugural address. He's going to have to refer to some things, but after that point in time, it would not behoove Biden himself, the president,
right,
to engage Trump. It won't. I would be shocked if Biden would do that.
And he hasn't done it to this point, so what makes you think he's going to start?
Yeah. I don't think. Well, there's people that are saying he should come out and say this and say that. He said, certain things. Up to this point, I just don't think after that he's going to be lured, no matter what happens, lured into some, debate with Trump.
No, I sure hope that doesn't happen because, if I'm advising him, my thought is put all the noise aside. Hey, we don't have time for that. The messaging that I'm focusing on is we don't have time for all that. We've got pandemic to beat. We've got an economy that's in tatters. We've got infrastructure that needs to be rebuilt. We've got actual work to do. I don't have time to entertain you. We got to get to work. That's where I think if he goes with his inauguration, I will be thrilled.
Right. And there's another aspect of this, time will tell. Will then, non-President Trump make a news network? If that happens, that's a whole different deal. What would he say on there? Would he incite anybody? That's a whole other argument and another issue if that happens. It may not happen now because I think New York State's going to keep them so busy that may not happen in itself.
Yeah, now I see that there's this Ricketts guy who is the guy who was the founder of TD America, or TD America Trading Company. His son's the governor of Nebraska, I believe it is. He's now starting a news network. Joe Ricketts is his name. He's starting what he's going to call Straight Arrow News, and it's going to be right down the middle. There's going to be no ideology. It's only going to be news.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he had the Chicago Cubs baseball team, and he had a company. I don't know if it's still active. It was American Film. Do you know if that's still active or not? I don't know.
I don't.
Okay. Right.
But I'm thinking, here's a guy who says he sees a market and a thirst for straight down the middle news. No ideology, no pontificating, no bloviating. Just Joe Friday, just the facts, ma'am.
Well, if that's coming from Ricketts, he was the one who. I think it was after the Obama citizenship theory. So maybe he's changed the pace. I don't know. I doubt it.
Or maybe we're just dressing it up as straight down the middle and again coming out with another OAN or another one of these Newsmax kind of scenarios who keep claiming that they're right down the middle. But
it's called fair and balanced.
Yeah. Again, more deception and more of that craziness. But for me, again, it comes back down to getting stuff done. And one of the areas that I'm really excited about is the fact that we're going to get a new labor secretary. Eugene Scalia will be gone. I'll be happy when that happens. And then now the mayor of Boston, this Marty Walsh, who I actually think is not a bad choice. Right.
Marty Walsh, which, as you point out, is the mayor of Boston. He's had labor positions. He's been a laborer since like the age of 20 or so, Rick, which I'm sure you know. And he also has served as a union president in the past. I'm not sure what age he became union president, but he was head of the building trades. He was
a laborers president.
Right. He was a laborers rep, and then he became president of the building trades. And he served in the House of Representatives also in Massachusetts back in the late 90s. So he's had that experience, which is very interesting. Not just a labor leader, but also served in the state house, and then of course became mayor. I think when it comes to labor issues, I don't think you can get much better than he is. And also, I wanted to give something to his credit because I've been down the same path. But he is in recovery. He has about 20 years of continuous sobriety in a 12-step program. So I did want to mention that.
And I look at that as something that he's overcome, and he, hopefully going to give him a different perspective, so that maybe he's going to look out for the little guy.
Right. So I mean, when you look at that, his service to his recovery, his service in the legislature, young, entering into the union, been head of the union, mayor. I think this guy's got all the right criteria, and of course he will be looking at reforming decades of labor issues when it comes to the lawmaking part of it.
Yeah. Now, I had been hoping for Sarah Nelson, the president of the Flight Attendants Union. That was never going to happen, but I was hoping for it. Would have loved to have seen that.
Right.
But he's a good choice, I think. So the question I've got for you, how much is he going to be able to do, given the fact that the NLRB isn't going to turn over fast enough? That I don't think Joe Biden is going to fire the guy on the NLRB. Although I would love to see nothing more than that. How much power is the labor secretary going to have in getting things done?
I mean, he'll be influential. I agree with you. I don't think things can be done overnight. You never know what will happen on a shakeup of the National Labor Relations Board. You never know. So at least he's a voice in there that is going to be a strong voice, which is what you need. Otherwise, it's just going to go par for course. Exerting pressure is the only way to change this, and then of course lawmaking on top of it.
No, I want them to fire Peter Robb on day one. He's the National Labor Relations General Counsel. I'd like to see him out the door on day one, because the decisions that they've come out with over the last couple of years have just been horrible. Basically, it's every one of the Chamber of Commerce's wet dream list that Trump was able and the NLRB was able to give them. So there's a lot of cleaning up to do, in my view.
Well, and also we are entering, as you know very well, a brand new era when it comes to labor rulings and safety and the pandemic. This is uncharted territory now.
No, I'm great. I'm hopeful. So, let me ask you this, because a lot of people saying that, there's a lot of legislative ideas. Labor wants to get the PRO Act passed. They want this big, this big stimulus bill, this big, what they're calling a recovery package. I would say it's just kind of, sustaining to get through this kind of package. But, there's a lot of big kind of legislation on the front. Do you see any of it passing?
Well, if we look at I'm doing a lot of ifs here. I see it, of course. I can see it in the House. I'm not going to say, quote, completely, easily, but I can see it in the House. I think the big question will be, as usual, what will the Senate do? It's a 50-50 Senate. Now we know how Harris will break the tie, the vice president, but what about members holding together when it comes to, supporting any labor initiative that Schumer has? That's yet to be seen.
Yeah.
All it's going to take is a couple members going the other direction. Of course, if you have a couple Republicans that they could garner, then it's going to be, it would be doable.
Any chance
the Senate's close.
Any chance they chuck the filibuster?
Well, I mean, I would hope so. Here's the kind of hypocrisy of the filibuster and closure. First of all, I separate them out, but they filibuster, and then they have to have the 60 votes for closure. And I've never agreed with that anyway. It's that would be like the House saying every time you want to come to a vote, you don't need 218 members. You need 240. I mean, it's just ridiculous. But each side, when they get in power, then they want the filibuster done away with. But when they're not in power, they don't want it done away with. Comes a point in time it needs to be done away with, and if they could make the move now and actually go back to simple majority when it comes to bringing something to the floor, the Senate would be a much, much better place.
Yeah, I agree. But we were told, because we learned in 8th grade, government class, the Senate is the upper chamber for a reason, and they're to tap down the passion so we don't have radical swings in legislation and in ideology. So it's supposed to be slow and deliberate, which is why we need those things to protect us from ourselves. Don't you know?
Well, when I was in the House, on a bipartisan basis, when I was in the House, we used to say that, the Founding Fathers created a great democracy, and we have the U.S. House, and somebody just had to mess it up with the Senate. When we allowed them to be elected.
Yeah, there you go. Last question I've got for you. Coming out of the inauguration, there's going to be the calls for unity. How effective do you think that's going to be, or are you expecting much of that?
You mean by President Biden?
Yes. I mean, it's obligatory. He's got to say, "Hey, we're going to reach out to the other side. We want to be, the big tent and all that." I think the people that he's reaching out to those are deaf ears. But I'm curious your thoughts of what he's going to say and maybe how it's received.
Well, he's going to say because as a leader, he has to temper everything down. We need a breath. We need to be able to breathe. The internal war needs to stop, and somebody's got to at least express that. And I think that's the best thing that Joe Biden can do. He can also reach out to the other side. He served in the Senate. Let's say that he garnishes 3 or 4 people on the R side, and things start to, come together from bipartisan purpose. That's great. If not, then he has to have his agenda and the Speaker and Chuck Schumer, and they have to go after it. If there's no willingness, then they have to go after what they want.
Right.
Not just sit and say, "Well, we'll wait till we get 3 more people." So he can start the effort. I think Biden will be genuine in it. I really do.
No, I do too.
I think he'll be very genuine. And I served in Congress 11 years. Biden was there. He was the go-to guy if you wanted to have anybody, have an ear, his staff, to listen. So I think he'll be genuine in it. But if there's no reciprocity, then he's going to, have to move with unison of his own party to get things done.
Yeah, going to be interesting to see what comes out Wednesday and how it's received. But as always,
sure
Bob, I appreciate the time. Good talking with you.
You too, Rick. Thank you.
Our good friend Bob Ney, former Ohio congressman, political analyst. One of those guys who I value the thoughts and the opinions. Let's wrap tonight up with those Trumpkins. According to the Center for Countering Digital Hate, this is a UK-based advocacy group. Their job is to fight misinformation. I love the name, Countering Digital Hate. They have pointed out that thanks to Donald Trump and the Trump administration, there are 5 very prominent, this is what they were able to find out, 5 very prominent anti-vaccine groups that got bailed out during the pandemic. So about almost $1 million of money went to funding these 5 groups: the National Vaccine Information Center, Mercola.com Health Resources, Informed Consent Action Network, Children's Health Defense, and the Tenpenny Integrative Medical Center. All of them pushing the anti-vax, narrative. We just gave them a boatload of money to tell people don't do it, so that we can make the pandemic longer. And I guess you could argue more profitable for somebody, especially the folks at the very top who are doing wildly well. Again, our heavy 400-500 at the top, our billionaire class, enriched themselves to the tune of over $1 trillion since the beginning of the pandemic. This is what we do with money. We bail out the people who are going to actually make things worse. That doesn't seem all that bright to me. But then again, look, the Ayn Rand Center ended up getting money from the PPP program, the Paycheck Protection Program, to keep their people on staff. And these are the people who are supposed to hate government. So quite interesting times we do live in, indeed. But I'm ticking down the days almost like a kid to Christmas. another full day and a half until we get a new president, and I cannot wait. Looking forward to hearing Joe Biden's inauguration speech. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. If you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast, the Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. It's going to be a great week. I'm looking forward to it. We'll see you back here next week.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.